She sat there, hands folded tightly in her lap, watching his lips move, but never seeing the words meant for her. The laughter around the restaurant felt louder than usual, pressing on her chest, reminding her of everything she could never hear. When he finally stood up and walked away without even looking back, her smile broke, fragile as glass. But then, across the room, someone's eyes caught hers. A man who didn't speak, didn't laugh, didn't mock. Instead, his hands began to move, slow and deliberate, signing words she thought she'd never hear in her heart. "You deserve better. Stay with me until the end, because this story will touch your heart in ways you don't expect." Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. What you're about to hear isn't just another romance story. This is about power, respect, and how sometimes the most dangerous man in the room can also be the most gentle. I've spent months researching this incredible true story that happened in Chicago, and I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll understand why sometimes fate works in the most unexpected ways. Emma Rodriguez had been preparing for this date for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of choosing the perfect dress, practicing conversations in the mirror, and convincing herself that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. She'd met David through a dating app where she'd been completely honest about her hearing loss. He'd seemed understanding, even interested. They'd texted back and forth for days, and his messages made her laugh in ways she hadn't in years. The restaurant he'd chosen was upscale, the kind of place with white tablecloths and soft lighting that made everything feel like a scene from a movie. Emma arrived 15 minutes early, because punctuality mattered to her. It was one of the few things she could control in a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable. She checked her hearing aids twice, making sure they were properly positioned, then smoothed down her navy blue dress and waited. David arrived 20 minutes late. Emma watched him scan the restaurant, his eyes landing on her briefly before looking around again, as if searching for someone else. When he finally approached her table, his smile seemed forced, uncomfortable. She stood to greet him, extending her hand, but he barely touched it before pulling away. The conversation started awkwardly. Emma had learned to read lips years ago, but David spoke quickly, his mouth barely moving, making it nearly impossible for her to follow. When she asked him to speak more clearly, he sighed audibly and repeated himself with exaggerated mouth movements that felt mocking rather than helpful. She tried to steer the conversation toward topics they'd discussed in their messages: his job in marketing, her work as a graphic designer for a nonprofit organization. But David seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone, glancing around the restaurant as if looking for an escape route. Then came the moment that changed everything. "Look," David said, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. "I need to be honest with you. I thought your hearing thing was like, temporary, like you had an ear infection or something. I didn't realize you were actually deaf." Emma's heart sank, but she kept her composure. "I have severe hearing loss," she corrected gently. "I wear hearing aids, but I'm not completely deaf. I can communicate perfectly well." David shook his head, his expression growing more uncomfortable by the second. "This isn't what I signed up for. Do you know how hard this is for me? Having to repeat everything, speak louder, make sure you can understand me. My friends would never let me live this down if they knew I was dating someone who's handicapped." The word hit her like a physical blow. Handicapped. In 2024, in a restaurant full of educated people, this man had just called her handicapped. Emma felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but she refused to let him see her cry. "I'm not handicapped," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm a college graduate with a successful career. I speak 3 languages, 2 of them with my hands. My hearing loss doesn't define my capabilities." But David was already standing, already reaching for his wallet. "Look, no offense, but I have standards. You should have been more upfront about this in your profile. I wasted my Friday night because you couldn't be honest about being disabled." He threw a $20 bill on the table and walked away, leaving Emma sitting alone with her untouched salad and shattered dignity. What Emma didn't know was that every word of this cruel exchange had been witnessed by someone who understood power, respect, and loyalty better than most people ever would. Vincent Torino sat at the corner table with his back to the wall, a habit formed from 30 years of making enemies and staying alive. At 52, he was the kind of man who commanded attention without asking for it. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal suit tailored to perfection, and his dark eyes missed nothing. The restaurant was one of his favorites, partly because he owned it, but mostly because the acoustics were perfect for private conversations. He'd been having dinner with his lieutenant, discussing territory disputes and protection arrangements, when the young woman's conversation at the nearby table caught his attention. Not because he was eavesdropping, but because the man's voice had grown loud enough to disturb the entire section. Vincent had built his reputation on reading people, understanding their motivations, their weaknesses, their character. In his line of work, the ability to judge someone's worth in seconds could mean the difference between life and death. And what he saw in David disgusted him more than any rival or traitor ever had. The young woman, however, impressed him immediately. Her posture remained straight despite the obvious humiliation. Her voice stayed calm and dignified, even as this fool berated her. She had class, something that couldn't be bought, couldn't be faked, and couldn't be taught. Vincent's own daughter, Sophia, had been born with a rare genetic condition that left her partially paralyzed on her left side. He'd watched her fight through years of physical therapy, endure stares and whispers, overcome challenges that would have broken lesser people. Sophia was now a successful attorney, married to a good man who saw her strength rather than her limitations. Anyone who called his daughter handicapped would find themselves having a very short conversation with Vincent's associates. As David stormed out of the restaurant, Vincent made a decision that would change 3 lives forever. He stood slowly, his movements deliberate and commanding. His lieutenant started to rise as well, but Vincent gestured for him to stay seated. This was something he needed to handle personally. Vincent walked across the restaurant with the quiet confidence of a man who owned every room he entered. Other diners glanced up, recognizing the authority in his bearing even if they didn't know his name. He stopped at Emma's table where she sat staring at her hands, clearly fighting back tears. "Excuse me, miss," Vincent said softly, his voice carrying the weight of respect that David had never shown. Emma looked up, her eyes still glistening with unshed tears, surprised to see this distinguished stranger standing beside her table. Vincent's hands moved with unexpected grace, forming signs that flowed like poetry in the air. "I witnessed what happened. That man was a fool who couldn't recognize quality when it was sitting right in front of him." Emma's breath caught in her throat. This elegant, powerful-looking man was signing to her. Not awkwardly, not with the hesitant movements of someone who'd learned a few phrases online, but with the fluid confidence of someone who truly understood the language. "May I?" Vincent gestured to the empty chair across from her, the one David had vacated so callously. Emma nodded, too stunned to speak. As Vincent settled into the chair, she noticed how other patrons glanced their way with a mixture of curiosity and respect. There was something about this man that commanded attention, an aura of authority that made even the waitstaff straighten their postures when he passed. "My name is Vincent," he signed, his movements deliberate and clear. "And I want you to know that what just happened here says nothing about you and everything about him." Emma found her voice, speaking while signing simultaneously. "I'm Emma, and thank you, but you didn't need to come over here. I'm used to this kind of reaction." Vincent's expression darkened slightly. "You shouldn't have to be used to it. No one should ever make you feel less than extraordinary for being exactly who you are." The sincerity in his hands, the way his dark eyes held hers without pity or discomfort, made something shift inside Emma's chest. Here was a man who spoke her language not because he had to, but because he chose to. Not because it was convenient, but because he respected her enough to meet her in her world. You sign beautifully, Emma said, her curiosity overcoming her embarrassment. How did you learn? Vincent's hands stilled for a moment, a shadow of pain crossing his features. My daughter Sophia. She was born with challenges that required us to find different ways to communicate when she was younger. Learning sign language wasn't just about talking to her. It was about showing her that every form of communication has its own beauty and power. Emma felt her heart squeeze. This wasn't a man who learned a few signs to impress someone. This was a father who'd learned a language to love his child better. She's grown now, Vincent continued, his signs flowing with paternal pride. A successful attorney, married to a man who sees her strength before anything else. But I'll never forget those early years when people would stare, when they'd speak to me instead of her, when they'd treat her like she was broken instead of different. The waiter approached their table hesitantly, clearly recognizing Vincent. Mr. Torino, is everything all right here? Can I get you anything? Bring the lady whatever she'd like, Vincent said aloud, then turned back to Emma. And please remove that other gentleman's payment. This meal is on the house. Emma started to protest, but Vincent held up his hand. I own this restaurant, among others, and I refuse to let someone leave my establishment feeling anything less than valued. The revelation hit Emma like a wave. This wasn't just any kind stranger. This was someone with real power, real influence, and he was using it to restore her dignity after David had tried to strip it away. You own this place? Emma asked, looking around the elegant dining room with new eyes. Vincent nodded. Family business. We believe in treating people with respect, creating spaces where everyone feels welcome. What happened here tonight goes against everything we stand for. As if summoned by their conversation, Vincent's lieutenant approached the table. Marco was a mountain of a man, built like a linebacker, but moving with surprising grace. He leaned down to whisper something in Vincent's ear, speaking in rapid Italian. Vincent's jaw tightened slightly, and he responded in the same language, his tone carrying unmistakable authority. Marco nodded and disappeared back into the crowd. Business matter, Vincent explained to Emma, switching back to sign language. Nothing that can't wait. But Emma had caught something in that exchange. Something in the way other patrons watched Vincent, the way the staff moved around him with a combination of respect and careful attention. This wasn't just a successful restaurant owner. This was someone who operated in a world where respect was earned through strength, where loyalty was everything, and where crossing the wrong person could have serious consequences. What kind of business? Emma asked, her intuition telling her there was more to Vincent Torino than met the eye. Vincent studied her for a moment, as if weighing how much truth to share. Import and export. Family operations that have been running for generations. We handle various forms of protection and security for businesses throughout the city. The careful way he phrased it told Emma everything she needed to know. This was a man who lived in the shadows of legitimate business, someone who understood power in ways that most people never would. And yet, here he was, treating her with more genuine respect than any supposedly respectable man ever had. Aren't you worried about being seen with someone like me? Emma asked, echoing David's cruel words with bitter irony. Vincent's expression hardened. Someone like you? You mean someone intelligent, dignified, and strong enough to handle ignorance with grace? Miss Emma, I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who think power comes from intimidation and cruelty. Tonight, I've watched you display more class and strength than most men twice your size could manage. Emma felt tears threatening again, but this time they weren't born of humiliation. They came from a place she'd almost forgotten existed, the place where someone saw her worth without conditions, without explanations, without apologies. My world isn't always pretty, Vincent continued, his hands moving with careful honesty. The people I deal with, the situations I handle, they can be complicated and dangerous. But in my world, respect is everything. Loyalty is everything. And anyone who can't see your value isn't worth the air they breathe. The intensity of his words, the way his dark eyes held hers, made Emma's pulse quicken. This wasn't just kindness from a stranger. This was something deeper, something that felt like recognition, like two people who understood what it meant to be underestimated, to be judged by surface appearances, to find strength in the places others saw weakness. "I should probably go," Emma said, though every instinct told her to stay. "It's getting late and I've already caused enough of a scene for one evening." Vincent shook his head firmly. "You didn't cause anything. You were the victim of someone else's ignorance and cruelty, and you handled it with more dignity than he deserved." He gestured to the untouched food on her plate. "Besides, you haven't eaten. Whatever else happens tonight, don't let that fool rob you of a good meal." Emma looked down at her salad, realizing that despite everything, she was actually hungry. The adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, leaving her feeling drained but oddly energized by this unexpected encounter. "All right," she said, picking up her fork, "but only if you'll tell me more about Sophia. She sounds remarkable." Vincent's entire demeanor softened, the dangerous edge that lurked beneath his polished exterior giving way to pure paternal love. "She is extraordinary," Vincent signed, his hands moving with the gentle precision of a father who'd spent years perfecting this silent language of love. "When Sophia was 5, the doctors told us she might never walk properly. They used words like limitations, challenges, special needs. My wife cried for days." Vincent paused, his fingers still for a moment as he gathered his thoughts. But Sophia looked at those doctors and signed back to them. She was already learning because she refused to let anyone speak for her when she could speak for herself. By 7, she was correcting their medical terminology. By 10, she was debating law cases with me over dinner. Emma found herself leaning forward, captivated by the pride radiating from this powerful man as he spoke about his daughter. There was something beautiful about watching someone so clearly dangerous become completely vulnerable when talking about the person he loved most. "She never saw her condition as something to overcome," Vincent continued. "She saw it as something that made her think differently, approach problems from angles others couldn't imagine. When she applied to law school, they questioned whether she could handle the physical demands of court appearances. She graduated valedictorian and now runs circles around attorneys twice her age." Emma smiled, the first genuine smile she'd felt all evening. "She sounds like someone I'd love to meet." "She would adore you," Vincent said, his dark eyes warming. "Sophia has always been drawn to people who understand that strength comes in many forms. She'd probably have a few choice words about what happened here tonight, too." The waiter returned, refilling their wine glasses and clearing David's abandoned place setting. Vincent watched the process with the careful attention of someone who noticed everything, controlled everything, protected everything in his domain. "Can I ask you something?" Emma said, her curiosity finally overcoming her caution. "When you heard what was happening, what made you decide to get involved? Most people would have just looked away, minded their own business." Vincent's expression grew serious, his hands moving with deliberate precision. "In my line of work, I've learned that there are 2 types of people in this world: those who use their power to lift others up, and those who use it to tear others down. That man who just left, he's weak. Real weakness isn't about physical limitations or hearing loss or any condition someone might have. Real weakness is needing to make someone else feel small so you can feel big." He leaned forward slightly, his presence commanding even in the intimate space between them. "My father taught me that a man's character is revealed in how he treats those who can do nothing for him. That fool saw you as someone who couldn't benefit his image, his social standing, his shallow little world. So he discarded you like you were worthless." Vincent's jaw tightened, and Emma caught a glimpse of the steel beneath his polished exterior. Men like that don't understand that real power comes from protecting those who deserve protection, from seeing value where others see inconvenience. Emma felt something shift in her chest, something that had been closed off for so long she'd forgotten it existed. This wasn't just kindness from a stranger. This was recognition from someone who understood what it meant to be judged, to be underestimated, to find strength in unexpected places. You know what's funny? Emma signed, her movements becoming more animated as her comfort grew. I spent 3 weeks preparing for tonight. I practiced conversations in the mirror, chose the perfect outfit, convinced myself that maybe this time would be different. I told myself that if I just tried hard enough, presented myself well enough, someone would see past my hearing loss to who I really am. Vincent shook his head firmly. The right person doesn't need to see past anything. The right person sees all of you and knows immediately that they've found something precious. His words hit her with unexpected force, carrying the weight of absolute certainty. This wasn't empty comfort or polite reassurance. This was truth delivered by someone who understood exactly what precious looked like. How do you know? Emma asked quietly. How can you be so sure? Vincent's hands stilled for a moment, and when he began signing again, his movements were slower, more thoughtful. Because I'm looking at you right now, and I see someone who handled cruelty with dignity, who refused to let ignorance break her spirit, who carries herself with a grace that can't be taught or faked. In my world, those qualities are rarer than diamonds and twice as valuable. The intensity of his gaze made Emma's pulse quicken. There was something happening here, something that felt bigger than a kind stranger offering comfort. The air between them seemed charged with possibility, with the recognition that some meetings changed the entire trajectory of a life. Your world, Emma said, her intuition telling her to push deeper. You keep mentioning your world like it's separate from everyone else's. What exactly do you do, Vincent? Vincent studied her for a long moment, as if weighing how much truth she could handle. When he finally began signing, his movements were careful, precise. I run a family business that's been operating in Chicago for 4 generations. We provide protection, security, and problem-solving services for businesses throughout the city. Sometimes those problems require unconventional solutions. Sometimes the people we protect face threats that the regular authorities can't or won't handle. Emma felt her breath catch. She wasn't naive. She understood what he was telling her without saying it directly. This was a man who operated outside the boundaries of conventional law, someone who lived by codes that were older and more absolute than anything written in courtrooms. And that doesn't scare you? Vincent asked, watching her reaction carefully. Knowing that the man sitting across from you isn't exactly what society would call respectable? Emma considered this. Really considered it. An hour ago, she might have been terrified. But after what she'd just experienced with David, after seeing how supposedly respectable men could treat her, the question felt almost absurd. The most respectable man I've met in months just called me handicapped and walked away, she said finally. Meanwhile, the man who operates outside respectability just spent the evening treating me like I matter. Which one should scare me more? A slow smile spread across Vincent's face, transforming his entire appearance. The dangerous edge softened without disappearing entirely, revealing glimpses of the man beneath the reputation. You're remarkable, he signed, and the way his hands moved made the words feel like a caress. Most people hear what I do and either run away or suddenly become very interested in what I can do for them. You just asked which one should scare you more. Emma laughed, surprising herself with the sound. Maybe I'm not most people. No, Vincent said, his dark eyes holding hers with unmistakable intensity. You definitely are not most people. The restaurant had grown quieter around them as the evening progressed. Other diners had finished their meals and departed, leaving the dining room with an intimate, almost private feeling. Vincent seemed completely comfortable in this environment, as if he belonged here in a way that went beyond mere ownership. Can I tell you something? Emma asked, her hands moving with growing confidence. I've been on dozens of dates over the past few years. Men who seemed perfect on paper, who said all the right things in their messages, who claimed to be open-minded and accepting. And every single time, the moment they really understood what my hearing loss meant for them, they found reasons to disappear. Vincent's expression darkened. Their loss? Literally? But here's what I realized tonight, Emma continued. I was so focused on finding someone who could accept my limitations that I never stopped to think about what I deserved. I was grateful for basic decency instead of expecting genuine respect. She paused, looking directly into Vincent's eyes. You've shown me more respect in 2 hours than some people I dated for months. Vincent reached across the table, not to touch her, but to place his hand palm up in an offering. Respect isn't something you should have to earn through perfection, Emma. It's something you deserve simply by existing as the remarkable person you are. Emma looked at his offered hand for a moment before placing hers on top of it. His skin was warm, calloused in places that spoke of work beyond boardrooms and restaurants. These were hands that had built things, protected things, fought for things that mattered. I have to ask, Emma said, intertwining her fingers with his. Is this real? This conversation, this evening, this feeling like I've known you longer than a few hours? Vincent's thumb traced across her knuckles with surprising gentleness. In my experience, the most real things in life are the ones that happen when you're not looking for them. I came here tonight for a business dinner. I never expected to meet someone who would make me remember what it feels like to want to protect something precious. The word precious hung between them, loaded with meaning that went far beyond politeness. Emma felt her heart racing, not with anxiety, but with the thrilling recognition of something significant beginning. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent's smile was soft, but certain. Now I ask if you'd like to have dinner with me tomorrow night. Somewhere quieter, where we can talk without interruption, where I can properly introduce you to the parts of my world that are beautiful instead of dangerous. Emma felt herself nodding before she'd fully processed the question. Yes. But Vincent? Yes? Next time, let me choose the restaurant. I want to take you somewhere that speaks my language as fluently as you do. Vincent's laughter was rich and genuine, the sound of a man who rarely found reasons to be truly happy, but had just discovered one. Deal. As long as you promise to tell me more about the woman who can turn a disaster into an adventure and make me forget that I'm supposed to be intimidating. Emma squeezed his hand. I promise. But I have to warn you, I'm much more dangerous than I look. Good, Vincent said, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. I was hoping you would be. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Emma realized that David's cruelty had inadvertently led her to something she'd never dared hope for. Not just acceptance, but celebration. Not just tolerance, but genuine appreciation. Not just someone who could handle her deafness, but someone who saw it as part of what made her extraordinary. Vincent helped her with her coat, his movements courteous but possessive in a way that made her pulse quicken. This was a man who protected what was his, and somehow, impossibly, she was beginning to feel like she might belong in that category. Thank you, Emma signed as they stood by the restaurant entrance. For everything, for seeing me, for respecting me, for making me remember what I deserve. Vincent's hands moved with the fluid grace she was already becoming addicted to watching. Thank you for reminding me that the most valuable things in life are the ones you find when you're brave enough to stand up for what's right. As they stepped out into the Chicago night, Emma felt like she was stepping into an entirely new version of her life, one where her worth wasn't negotiable, where her differences were celebrated, and where a chance encounter with a dangerous man had taught her the most important lesson of all. She deserved better, and maybe, just maybe better, had been waiting for her all along. The following evening arrived with unexpected nervousness. Emma stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting her emerald green dress for the third time. She'd chosen a small Italian cafe in Little Italy, a place her deaf friend Maria had recommended, because the lighting was perfect for reading lips and the acoustics made hearing aids more effective. Vincent arrived precisely on time, and Emma's breath caught when she saw him. Gone was the intimidating businessman from the night before. Tonight he wore dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that made his silver hair look distinguished rather than dangerous, but his eyes held the same intensity, the same recognition that had made her feel seen for the first time in years. You look beautiful, he signed as he approached, his movements fluid and confident, Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Thank you. I wasn't sure what to expect tonight." Vincent smiled, gesturing toward the cafe entrance. "Expect honesty. Expect conversation. Expect me to ask you questions I've been thinking about since I left you last night." They were seated at a corner table with soft lighting and a clear view of the entire restaurant. Emma noticed how Vincent positioned himself with his back to the wall, how his eyes swept the room once before settling on her completely. Old habits from a life where awareness meant survival. "So tell me about your work," Vincent said, his hands moving as he spoke aloud. "Last night you mentioned graphic design for a nonprofit. What kind of work calls to you?" Emma's face lit up as she began explaining her job at Chicago Children's Advocacy Center. She designed materials that helped social workers communicate with traumatized children, created visual aids that made complex legal processes understandable to young minds. "The hardest part is making sure every child feels heard," Emma signed, her passion evident in every gesture. "Sometimes they've been through situations where adults didn't listen, didn't believe them, didn't protect them. My job is creating tools that give them voice when words feel impossible." Vincent watched her hands with rapt attention, understanding dawning in his dark eyes. "You help children find their voice because you know what it's like when the world doesn't listen properly." Emma nodded, surprised by his immediate comprehension. "Exactly. When I lost most of my hearing at 16, I felt invisible for years. Like my thoughts and feelings didn't matter because they were harder for others to access. These kids, they're dealing with trauma that makes them feel invisible too." "What happened when you were 16? Vincent asked gently, his voice carrying no pity, only genuine interest. Emma hesitated for a moment, then decided this man deserved her honesty. "Meningitis. I was a junior in high school, captain of the debate team, planning to study journalism. Then I got sick, spent 2 weeks in the hospital, and woke up in a world where sound was mostly memory." Vincent's jaw tightened slightly. "How did people treat you afterward?" Emma's journey reminds us that sometimes our worst moments lead to our most beautiful beginnings. What started as humiliation became the night she discovered her true worth through someone who saw her strength instead of her struggles. Vincent showed her that respect isn't earned through perfection, but deserved simply by being extraordinary exactly as you are. Their story proves that love speaks every language, especially the silent ones. If this touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember they deserve better too.